The bell tolled 3 times through the whiteout, warning travelers away from the summit road. And Silas Norvak lay in a snowbank with his left leg folded beneath him, at an angle legs were not meant to bend, watching a dark shape emerge from the storm like something out of the tales riders told to pass the miles between way stations. He had heard those tales. Every postal rider who worked the northern circuit knew about the monster of Whistler's Pass, the thing that kept the stone refuge below the summit, the creature that pulled lost travelers from the drifts and sent them on their way with stories that grew taller with each retelling. Some said she was a bear that walked upright. Others claimed she was a witch who had taken a beast's form as punishment for unnamed sins. The darkest versions whispered that she collected the dead, that not everyone she pulled from the snow made it down the mountain alive. The shape resolved into a woman, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in layers of oiled wool and fur. An orc. Her skin was the green of spring moss, her tusks small and chipped, and the left side of her jaw was twisted with scar tissue that pulled her mouth into a permanent half-grimace. She carried a coiled rope over one shoulder and moved through the knee-deep snow with the efficiency of someone who had done this too many times to count. "Can you stand?" Her voice was rough, pitched to carry over the wind. Legs broken. Silas kept his words short, conserving warmth. Horse bolted. Males in the ravine. She knelt beside him, her movements economical, and ran her hands down his leg with the impersonal competence of a field surgeon. When she reached the break, he hissed through his teeth. "Clean fracture mid-shaft. You'll live if you don't freeze first." She pulled the rope from her shoulder. "This will hurt. Everything already hurts." "Fair point." She splinted the leg with 2 lengths of wood from her pack, binding them so tightly he saw stars, then looped the rope under his arms. "The refuge is 200 yards downslope. I'm going to drag you. Try not to scream, the snow's unstable, and I'd rather not dig us both out of a slide." Silas had been a rider for 12 years, carrying mail through rain and heat, and the kind of cold that froze spit before it hit the ground. He had been thrown, kicked, bitten, and once chased by bandits for 3 miles before losing them in a river crossing. He did not scream when she hauled him through the snow, but it was a near thing. The refuge was a low stone building built into the lee of the mountain, invisible until they were nearly on top of it. She dragged him through a heavy door into a dim interior that smelled of wood smoke, wet dog, and something cooking. 3 large dogs, some kind of mountain breed, thick-coated and broad-chested, raised their heads from a pile of blankets near the fire, then settled back down when they recognized her. "Off the floor," she said, untying the rope. "There's a cot by the hearth." He crawled to it, hauled himself up with his arms, and collapsed onto a mattress that crackled with the smell of fresh straw. The room spun. When it steadied, she was crouched by the fire, ladling something from a pot into a wooden bowl. "Eat." She thrust the bowl at him. "It's just stew, but it's hot." The stew was venison and root vegetables, over-salted and under-seasoned, but it was indeed hot. He ate half of it before his hands stopped shaking enough to trust himself with the spoon. "Your mail is gone," she said, settling onto a 3-legged stool. "The ravine's 100 feet deep, and the bottom's all snowmelt and broken rock. Even if I could get down there, anything in your satchel is pulp by now." "Understood." He would have to report the loss when he reached the next station. The Postal Service took a dim view of lost mail, but they took an even dimmer view of dead riders. How long until the pass clears? 3 days, maybe 4. Storm's only getting started. She stood, crossed to a shelf lined with jars and bundles of dried herbs, and began mixing something in a small mortar. "I'll set the bone properly once you've eaten. There's poppy if you want it." "I'll take it." She brought him a cup of bitter tea that tasted like bark and made his tongue numb, then waited until his eyes began to glaze before pulling the splints free and taking hold of his leg. The poppy kept him from screaming, but he felt everything: the grind of bone ends finding each other, the pull of muscle and tendon as she aligned the break, the sharp burn of the splint binding tight again. When she finished, his shirt was soaked through with sweat. "Sleep now," she said. "I'll check the line before dark." The line, bell rope, runs from here to the summit marker. If someone's stranded up top, they can ring down. She pulled on a second coat, heavier than the first. "The dogs will wake you if anything's wrong." She left, and the wind filled the space where her voice had been. Silas lay still, feeling the poppy drag him down into sleep, and his last coherent thought was that she had not told him her name. He woke to full darkness and the sound of the door opening. The orc woman entered with a gust of snow and wind, shaking ice from her coat like one of the dogs. She barred the door, fed the fire, checked the pot of stew, then finally glanced at him. Awake, barely. "Good. The storm's settling in properly now. We'll be snowed in by morning." She ladled stew into her own bowl and ate standing up, her back to the fire. "I'm Kara Voss. I keep this refuge for the territorial road wardens. You're the first rider I've pulled out this season, but we're only 6 weeks into winter, so I expect you won't be the last." Silas Norvak. Northern Circuit, out of Millbrook. Long way from home. Work takes you where the mail goes. She made a sound that might have been agreement or amusement. It was hard to tell with the scar pulling at her mouth. "You'll be here through midwinter at minimum. That leg needs 8 weeks to knit, and the pass won't be safe for a man on crutches until the melt starts. Hope you're not expected anywhere." "I'm expected at every station on my route. Send word when the pass clears." Someone from the warden's office comes up once a month with supplies. They'll carry a message down. It was not a question, so he did not bother answering. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind test the shutters, the pop and hiss of the fire, the quiet sounds of Kara moving through the refuge with the ease of long familiarity. One of the dogs left the pile by the hearth and padded over to sniff his hand, then licked his fingers with a tongue like warm leather. "That's brick," Kara said. "The other 2 are granite and shale. Don't feed them from your bowl or they'll never leave you alone. You name your dogs after rocks." "They're avalanche dogs. I breed them for the warden's patrol stations. Rocks are what they're trained to dig through." Silas opened his eyes enough to study the dog at his side. Brick was big, 100 pounds at least, with a dense double coat and a broad skull built for breaking trail. "Smart animals. Smarter than most people I've met." She finished her stew, rinsed the bowl in a bucket of water, and set it on the shelf to dry. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you if your fever spikes." "I don't have a fever. Not yet. But broken bones like to get infected, and if that happens up here, you'll wish the fall had killed you." She banked the fire, rolled herself into a blanket on the far side of the room, and within minutes, her breathing had evened into sleep. Silas lay awake longer, watching the firelight paint shadows on the stone walls, wondering what kind of life led a person to spend their winters alone on a mountain pulling strangers out of snowdrifts. The storm lasted 5 days. Silas spent most of it asleep, or hovering in the gray space between sleep and waking, his leg a constant throb of heat and pain. Kara checked the brake twice daily, changed the bindings, made him drink foul-tasting teas that she said would prevent infection. When he was lucid enough to sit up, she fed him stew and hard bread, then disappeared outside to check the bell line or tend the dogs or do whatever other mysterious tasks keeping a mountain refuge required. On the 6th day, he woke to sunlight pouring through the gap in the shutters and the smell of frying bacon. Kara stood at the hearth, turning strips of meat in a flat iron pan, while the dogs watched her with the focused intensity of professional beggars. "Storm broke," she said without turning. "Pass is still closed. There's 8 feet of new snow on the summit road, but at least we can see the sky." "How's the leg?" "Still attached. No fever, no rot. You're a lucky man, Silas Norvak." She slid the bacon onto 2 wooden plates, added a handful of fried cornmeal cakes, and brought one to him. "Eat. You've been living on broth for almost a week, and you're starting to look like a scarecrow." The bacon was crisp and salty, the corn cakes dense and filling. He ate everything on the plate and felt hunger wake up properly for the first time since the fall. "Better," Kara said, taking the empty plate. "You'll be able to get around on crutches in another week or so once the bone starts to knit. Until then, stay off it. Not much choice in the matter." "You'd be surprised. I pulled a trapper out of a drift 2 winters back, broke his ankle in 3 places, and caught him trying to walk on it the next day because he was bored. Ankle never did heal right. I'm not an idiot. Glad to hear it." She cleaned up from breakfast, then pulled on her outdoor gear. "I'm taking the dogs out to check the avalanche paths. There's water in the bucket, chamber pots under the cot, and if you need anything else you'll have to wait. Don't add wood to the fire, I've got it set to burn steady until I get back. Kara." She paused at the door, one hand on the latch. "Thank you," he said, "for pulling me out." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That's the job," she said finally, and left. The days developed a rhythm. Kara rose before dawn, fed the fire and the dogs, made breakfast for them both, then spent the morning outside clearing snow from the refuge roof, checking the bell line, training the dogs on scent work and avalanche recovery. She came back at midday to prepare the main meal, which was almost always stew with variations depending on what she pulled from her stores, then went out again until dark. Evenings, she spent mending harnesses, carding wool, carving new toggles for the dogs' working vests, or reading from a small collection of books that looked like they had been read to the point of disintegration. Silas, trapped on the cot with his legs splinted, had nothing to do but watch her work and think. He was not accustomed to stillness. His life had been movement for as long as he could remember, first in the territorial cavalry, riding dispatches between garrison posts during the border conflicts. Then with the postal service after his enlistment ended. He measured time in miles covered, in letters delivered, in the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on hard, packed roads. Lying still felt like dying. "You're twitching," Kara said one evening, glancing up from the harness she was stitching. "Something wrong, just not used to being idle." "Idle." She snorted. "You're healing, that's not the same thing." "Feels the same." She set down the harness. "You want something to do?" "Yes." "Fine, you can card wool. I've got 2 bales that need processing before the warden's supply run, and my hands are tired." She fetched a pair of hand cards from the shelf, flat wooden paddles studded with short metal teeth, and a basket of raw fleece. "You comb it between the cards until the fibers line up, then roll it into a roving. Think you can manage that without standing up?" "I'll manage." The work was tedious and made his forearms ache, but it gave his hands something to do and his mind something to focus on besides the itch and throb of his healing leg. Kara returned to her stitching, and they worked in silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the sound of the dogs snoring in their pile of blankets. "How long have you been up here?" Silas asked after a while. 9 years. Took over the refuge when the last keeper died, old man named Torrance. Lungs finally gave out. I was working the low country timber camps then, and when the wardens put out the job listing, I figured it was better than chopping trees for people who wouldn't drink from the same water barrel. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a flat recitation of fact. Silas pulled another clump of wool through the cards, watching the fibers align into neat parallel lines. You ever get lonely? No. She bit off a thread, tested the strength of her stitching. Lonely's when you want company and can't get it. I don't want company. I want to be left alone to do my work, and this is the one place I've found where that's possible. Present circumstances accepted. Present circumstances are part of the work. She threaded her needle again, started a new seam. Most of the people I pull out are decent enough. Scared, cold, grateful to be alive. They don't ask questions, don't make trouble. They hole up until the weather clears, then they leave, and 6 months later I hear campfire stories about the monster who lives on the pass. Does that bother you? Why should it? I've been called worse things by people who weren't half frozen and in shock. She finished the seam, held up the harness to inspect it in the firelight. Besides, being a monster has its advantages. People who are afraid of you don't waste your time trying to get close. Silas thought about that while he carded another handful of wool. He had known men like Kara in the cavalry, the ones who had been treated so badly for so long that they had armored themselves in indifference and called it peace. Some of them had been good soldiers. Most of them had been miserable. For what it's worth, he said carefully, I don't think you're a monster. Kara went very still. Then she laughed, a short bark of sound with no humor in it. You've been here less than 2 weeks, Silas Norvak. Give it time. But the comment seemed to have unsettled her, because she put away her stitching earlier than usual and banked the fire for the night. Silas lay in the dark, listening to her breathe, and wondered what it cost a person to spend 9 years on a mountain being afraid of hope. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. The bone was knitting cleanly. Kara checked it every few days and pronounced herself satisfied, and Silas graduated from the cot to a pair of crutches carved from green pine and padded with wool. He could get himself to the door and back, could stand long enough to wash at the basin or help with simple tasks that did not require much walking. The confinement still chafed, but it was better than lying flat. The refuge itself was larger than it had seemed on that first night. In addition to the main room with its hearth and sleeping area, there was a smaller chamber carved into the mountain that Kara used for cold storage, packed with snow and ice to keep meat and cheese from spoiling, and a lean-to attached to the outer wall that housed firewood, tools, and the supplies for the dogs. The whole structure was built to withstand the kind of weather that killed unprepared travelers. Thick stone walls, a roof weighted with rocks to keep the shingles from blowing off, shutters that barred from the inside. How many people do you pull out in a season? Silas asked one morning, watching Kara sort through a stack of wooden markers, each one carved with a date and a set of initials. Depends on the winter. Bad year, maybe 20. Good year, 5 or 6. She set aside a marker, picked up another. These are the ones who didn't make it. I bury them below the refuge when the ground thaws, mark the graves so their families can find them if they come looking. Silas looked at the stack of markers. There had to be 40 or 50 at least, and felt something cold settle in his chest. You do this alone. Who else is going to do it? The wardens. A crew. Anyone. The wardens pay me a stipend to keep the refuge open and render aid to stranded travelers. They don't pay me enough to hire help, and even if they did, who's going to agree to spend 6 months on a frozen mountain with an orc? She sorted through a few more markers, then bundled them together with a length of cord. I manage fine on my own. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. She stood, tucked the bundle of markers into a wooden box on the shelf. You meant well, most people do. But meaning well doesn't change the fact that I've been doing this job for 9 years without help, and I'll keep doing it the same way until I can't anymore. She pulled on her coat and left before he could figure out what to say. That night, Silas lay awake long after Kara had rolled herself into her blankets, thinking about the markers and the graves, and the 9 years she had spent on this mountain pulling strangers out of the snow. It was brutal work, lonely work, and she did it without complaint because the alternative was going back down to the low country where people would not drink from the same water barrel. He thought about the way she moved through the refuge efficient, self-contained, expecting nothing from anyone. He thought about the careful distance she maintained, the way she flinched from gratitude as if it were an insult. He thought about the scar on her jaw and the chip in her tusk and the blunt, callous strength of her hands. And he thought, with the kind of clarity that only comes in the deep hours of the night, that Kara Voss was the most competent, self-reliant, and thoroughly lonely person he had ever met. It was not a comfortable realization. The next morning, he got up before she did a feat that required waking in full darkness and lying still while his leg complained and used his crutches to hobble to the hearth. The fire had burned down to coals. He fed it carefully, the way he had watched her do it 100 times until the flames caught. Then he filled the kettle from the water barrel, hung it over the fire, and started pulling ingredients for breakfast from the shelf. Kara woke to the smell of frying bacon and sat up so fast she nearly cracked her head on the shelf above her blankets. "What are you doing?" "Making breakfast." Silas flipped the bacon with a fork, checked the pot of cornmeal mush bubbling on the edge of the fire. "Sit down. It's almost ready." She stared at him like he had just announced he was planning to sprout wings and fly to the summit. "You're supposed to be resting." "I've been resting for a month. I'm healed enough to stand at a fire." He divided the bacon between 2 plates, spooned out the cornmeal mush, poured tea into 2 wooden cups. "Besides, you've been cooking every meal since I got here. Least I can do is return the favor." Kara took the plate he offered, still looking suspicious, and sat down on her usual stool. She ate slowly, watching him the entire time as if she expected the food to disappear if she looked away. "It's fine," she said finally. "The bacon's a little burnt, but it's fine. I'll take that as a compliment. Don't." But there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something lighter, less guarded. Silas filed it away and said nothing, just drank his tea and watched the dogs beg shamelessly for bacon scraps. After that, he started taking on more of the indoor tasks. He could not go out in the snow, his leg was not strong enough yet, and Kara flatly refused to risk him falling and breaking it again, but he could card wool, mend harnesses, chop vegetables for the stew pot, keep the fire fed and the water barrel filled from the snow she brought in. It was not much, but it was something, and it meant Kara could spend more time outside doing the work that actually mattered. She did not thank him. But she stopped protesting when he got up to make breakfast, and once when he handed her a cup of tea without being asked, she looked at him with an expression he could not quite decipher. "You're different," she said. "Different how? From the others. The ones I pull out." She wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the steam. "Most people can't wait to leave. They smile and nod and say the right things, but you can see it in their eyes. They think I'm going to eat them in their sleep, or drag them off to some orc war band in the hills. They're terrified the whole time they're here, and the second the pass clears, they run. I'm not running. No." She looked up at him, and the firelight caught in her eyes, turning them amber. "You're cooking me breakfast and mending my harnesses and asking questions like you actually care about the answers. Why?" It was a fair question. Silas thought about all the easy, meaningless answers he could give because he was grateful, because he was bored, because it was the decent thing to do. But Kara had spent 9 years on this mountain being lied to by people who smiled while they lied, and she deserved better. "Because you work harder than anyone I've ever met," he said. Because you pulled me out of a snowbank when you could have left me to freeze, and you set my leg and kept me alive, and you act like it's nothing, like it doesn't matter." He set down his own cup. "And because every time I watch you go out into weather that would kill a normal person, I think about what happens if you don't come back. Who rings the bell then? Who pulls the next rider out of the snow?" Kara was silent for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "That's not your problem." "Maybe not, but it bothers me anyway." She looked away, her jaw tight, and Silas knew he had pushed too far. But he did not take it back because it was true, and because Kara Voss had spent too much of her life being told that her work did not matter and her safety was not worth considering. The silence stretched. Then Kara stood, set her cup on the shelf with deliberate care, and pulled on her coat. "I'm checking the bell line," she said. "Don't burn the refuge down while I'm gone." She left, and Silas sat by the fire, listening to the wind and wondering if he had just ruined the fragile, careful thing that had been growing between them. But that night, when Kara came back with snow in her hair and ice crusted on her sleeves, she stopped beside his cot on her way to the fire. "Thank you," she said, "for worrying. It's been a long time since anyone did that." Then she moved on before he could answer, and Silas lay in the dark, feeling something shift and settle in his chest like a bone finding its proper alignment. Winter deepened. The days were short and brutally cold, the nights longer. Twice more the bell tolled, and both times Kara went out with the dogs and came back hours later with frost-bitten travelers who huddled by the fire and left as soon as the weather allowed. Silas watched her work, the calm efficiency, the impersonal kindness, the way she kept herself separate even when she was saving someone's life, and understood that this was how she survived. Not by being hard, but by being unreachable, except she was reaching now. Small things, easily missed, but Silas had spent enough time watching her to notice. The way she checked his leg without being asked, her hands careful on the healing bone. The way she poured his tea first before her own. The way she sat a little closer to the fire on the nights when they worked side by side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and the way she talked. Not about the work or the weather, but about the things she had seen in her 9 years on the mountain, the time a family of foxes denned under the refuge, and she spent a whole spring listening to the kits play. The evening she watched a golden eagle take a marmot not 10 feet from the door. The winter the snow fell so thick and fast that she could not see the bell line from the refuge entrance and had to navigate by counting steps and feeling for the rope. "You love it here," Silas said one night. Kara looked up from the dog vest she was oiling. "What? The mountain, the refuge, you love it?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't know if love is the right word, but it's mine. The only thing I've ever had that was mine, that I didn't have to fight someone for or justify or apologize for. Up here, I'm not a monster or a savage or an orc who should know her place. I'm just the keeper, and that's enough. It shouldn't have to be. Maybe not, but it is." She went back to oiling the vest, her movements slow and methodical. "What about you? You love the postal service." "I don't know if love is the right word," Silas said, echoing her, and Kara's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "But it's steady work, and it gets me out of towns before I have time to wear out my welcome. I like the road. I like the routine. I'm good at it. You miss it." "Some. Mostly I miss my horse, best animal I ever worked with, smart as a whip and steady in bad weather. Hope she made it back to a station. If she was as smart as you say, she did." They worked in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the dogs snoring. Then Kara set down the vest and looked at him, really looked at him, in a way that made Silas feel like she was seeing past the surface to something underneath. "You're beautiful to me, Orc," he said. The words came out flat and plain, the way he said everything, with no poetry or flourish. Just a statement of fact, delivered in the middle of oiling dog vests, as unremarkable as commenting on the weather. Kara froze. The vest slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thump, but she did not move to pick it up. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her mouth half open, and for a long moment she did not seem to breathe. "What did you say?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I said you're beautiful to me." Silas met her gaze, steady and sure. "Didn't think it needed repeating, but I'll say it again if you want." "You're lying." "I don't lie." "Then you're confused, or—" She stood abruptly, her stool tipping over behind her. "I have scars. I'm an orc. People cross the street to avoid me. Children cry when they see me. I'm the thing parents used to scare their kids into behaving. I'm not beautiful." "You're wrong." "Silas, you're wrong," he said again, and there was steel in his voice now, the iron certainty of a man who had looked at a thing from every angle and found it true. "I don't care what people say or what you've been told your whole life. I've spent 2 months watching you. I've seen you go out in storms that would kill anyone else. I've seen you set bones and dig graves and train dogs and keep this place running with nothing but your own 2 hands. I've seen you pull strangers out of the snow and send them home alive, and I've seen the way you don't expect anything in return. Not gratitude, not kindness, nothing." He leaned forward, his hands braced on his knees. "You're the strongest, most stubborn, most relentlessly competent person I've ever met. And when I look at you, that's what I see. Not a monster, not something to be afraid of, just you. And you're beautiful to me." Kara made a sound like she had been punched. She turned away, her hands coming up to cover her face, and her shoulders shook. Silas stood carefully, weight on his good leg, the crutch braced under his arm and crossed the space between them. He stopped just behind her, close enough to touch but not touching, and waited. "I don't know what to do with this," Kara said, her voice muffled. "I don't know how to nobody's ever. You don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know." She lowered her hands, turned to face him. Her eyes were wet, her scarred jaw trembling. "Why? Because it's true. And because you should hear it from someone who means it." Kara stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or pity or cruelty. Whatever she saw there, it made her breath hitch. "Silas," she said, and it was a question and a plea and a warning all at once. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. Her palm was rough with calluses, her fingers cold from the night air, and when he folded his hand around hers, she shook. "I mean it," he said quietly. "Every word." Kara closed her eyes and a tear slid down her cheek, following the line of the scar. "I don't know how to believe you. Then I'll keep saying it until you do." She laughed, a small broken sound, and squeezed his hand so hard it ached. "You're a strange man, Silas Norvak, so I've been told." They stood like that for a long time, hands clasped, the fire warm at their backs. Outside, the wind howled through the pass, but inside the refuge it was quiet and still. The warden's supply run came 3 days later. Silas was outside, leaning on his crutch and watching Kara put the dogs through their paces, when he heard the jingle of harness bells and saw the mule team crest the rise below the refuge. 2 men rode in the lead, wrapped in fur and wool, their faces wind-burnt and tired. Kara called off the dogs and went to meet them. Silas followed more slowly, his leg still weak but healing. Kara. The older of the 2 riders, a gray-bearded man with the look of someone who had spent his life in the mountains, swung down from his mule and nodded to her. "Wasn't sure we'd make it up with all this snow. How's the pass?" "Holding. No major slides this month, but the summit roads got some deep drifts. You'll want to take the low traverse on the way back." She glanced at the second rider, a younger man with a warden's badge pinned to his coat. "Who's this?" Garrett from the territorial office. "He's here to do an inspection." The gray beard's voice was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes that looked like warning. Garrett dismounted, pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebag, and looked around the refuge with the expression of a man who had already decided what he was going to find. "Kara Voss, that's right. I'm here on behalf of the Territorial Road Commission. There's been some concern about the viability of maintaining a refuge on this pass, given the cost and the logistical challenges." He opened the portfolio, pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I'll need to see your records, rescues, expenditures, maintenance logs. They're inside." Kara led them into the refuge, and Silas followed, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had seen enough bureaucrats in his time with the cavalry to recognize the type. Garrett was not here to evaluate anything. He was here to justify a decision that had already been made. Kara pulled a wooden box from the shelf and handed it to Garrett. Inside were 9 years of records, written in Kara's blunt, efficient hand, dates, names, conditions, outcomes. Garrett flipped through them with the speed of someone who was not actually reading, then set the box aside. "And the expenditures." Kara handed him a second ledger. Garrett scanned it, made a note on one of his papers, then looked up. "It says here you've requested an increase in your stipend for the past 3 years. Each time the request was denied." "That's correct." "And yet you've continued to operate the refuge." "That's the job." Garrett made another note. "How many rescues did you perform last season?" 14. "And how many fatalities?" Kara's jaw tightened. 6. 6. Garrett wrote it down, underlining it twice. "That's a 43% failure rate. That's 6 people who were already dead when I found them," Kara said, her voice hard. "Exposure, falls, injuries too severe to survive. I documented everything." "I'm sure you did." Garrett closed the ledger, slipped it back into his portfolio. "Miss Voss, the Commission has been reviewing the costs associated with this refuge, and I'm afraid the numbers don't support continued operation. The pass sees limited traffic, the rescues are expensive, and the success rate is it's concerning. The success rate is as good as it can be when people ignore the warning bells and try to cross in a blizzard. Be that as it may." Garrett pulled another paper from his portfolio. "The Commission has decided to decommission this refuge at the end of the season. The pass will be marked as closed during winter months, and travelers will be directed to the southern route. The southern route adds 4 days to the crossing, but it's safer, and it doesn't require the territorial government to maintain a remote outpost at considerable expense." Garrett handed her the paper. "This is your formal notice. You have until the spring melt to vacate the premises. The structure will be repurposed as a storage depot for the summer road crews." Kara took the paper, read it once, then set it on the table with the kind of careful control that meant she was barely holding herself in check. "What about the people who get caught in storms? Who's going to pull them out? The pass will be closed. There won't be anyone to pull out." "You can close a pass all you want, people will still try to cross it. And when they do and they get stuck, they'll die because there's no one here to help them." Garrett's expression did not change. "That's a risk the Commission is willing to accept. The decision is final." He tucked the portfolio back into his saddlebag. "I'm sorry, Miss Voss. I know this isn't easy." He did not sound sorry. He sounded like a man who had done an unpleasant but necessary task and was eager to be done with it. The gray-bearded rider, who had been silent through the whole exchange, finally spoke. "Kara, I'll put in a word with the regional office. Maybe they'll reconsider." "Don't bother, Marcus." Kara's voice was flat. "We both know how this works." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but Garrett was already heading for the door. The two of them unloaded the supplies: flour, salt, dried beans. a few slabs of bacon, and repacked the mules with the pelts and wool Kara had prepared for trade. Then they mounted up and rode back down the pass, their bells fading into the distance. Kara stood in the doorway, watching them go, the notice still in her hand. Silas waited, giving her space until she finally turned and came back inside. "They're shutting it down," she said. 9 years and they're shutting it down. I heard. She sat down hard on the stool, staring at the paper like it was written in a language she could not read. I knew it was coming. The stipend cuts, the questions every time Marcus came up, the way they kept talking about cost efficiency. But I thought if I just kept working, if I kept pulling people out and documenting everything and proving that this place mattered, they'd leave me alone. She laughed bitter. "Stupid. It's not stupid. You did good work. Good work doesn't matter if the people in charge don't care." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "What am I supposed to do now? Go back to the low country and chop trees? Hire on as a laborer somewhere and spend the rest of my life being told I should be grateful someone's willing to employ an orc?" Silas crossed to the table, lowered himself onto the bench across from her. "What if you fought it? Fought it how? The commission's already made its decision. Then make them unmake it. Document everything, every rescue, every life saved, every reason this refuge needs to stay open. Get statements from the people you've pulled out. Show them what happens if this place closes. Silas, I've been documenting for 9 years. They don't care, so make them care." He leaned forward. "You're right that people will still try to cross the pass. And when they do and they die, that's on the commission. Make sure everyone knows it. Write to the newspapers, the territorial council, anyone who'll listen. Tell them what's happening up here." Kara looked at him, something like hope flickering in her eyes. "You really think that would work?" "I think it's worth trying, and I think you're too stubborn to go down without a fight." She smiled, small and fragile, and set the crumpled paper on the table. "All right, we'll try." They spent the next 2 weeks building the case. Kara dug out every record she had 9 years of rescues, neatly catalogued, with notes on conditions and outcomes. Silas, who had written enough dispatch reports in the cavalry to know how to make bureaucrats pay attention, helped her organize it into something coherent. They documented the cost of the rescues versus the cost of the alternative, the lost lives. The lost revenue from trade disrupted by the longer southern route. The political fallout when prominent travelers died on a pass the commission had declared safe by virtue of closing it. They also documented the dogs. Kara had been breeding and training avalanche dogs for the territorial wardens for 6 years, and every litter she produced was spoken for before the pups were weaned. The dogs alone brought in more revenue than the refuge cost to operate, and shutting down the refuge meant shutting down the breeding program. "That's leverage," Silas said, reviewing the numbers. "The wardens don't want to lose those dogs. They're too valuable." "Maybe." Kara did not sound convinced, but Garrett didn't seem like the kind of man who cares about dogs. "Garrett's not the one we need to convince. He's just the errand boy. We need to go over his head." "To who?" "The territorial council, the regional warden. Anyone with the authority to overrule the commission." Silas tapped the stack of papers. "And we need statements from the people you've saved. Names, dates, what would have happened if you hadn't been here. Most of them didn't even tell me their names. Then we'll find them. The Postal Service keeps records of every rider who works a route. I can get you the names of anyone who's passed through here in the last 5 years. The rest we'll track down through the warden's incident reports." It was slow work, tedious and frustrating, but it gave them something to focus on besides the looming deadline. Kara wrote letters, carefully worded and blunt, explaining the situation and asking for help. Silas wrote his own letters to the Postal Service, pointing out that the refuge had saved the lives of at least 4 riders in the past 3 years, and that closing it would make the northern circuit significantly more dangerous. And in the evenings, when the work was done and the fire burned low, they sat together and talked. Not about the refuge or the commission, but about the things that mattered underneath the lives they had lived, the choices they had made, the quiet, unexpected comfort of not being alone. "I never thought I'd care about someone the way I care about you," Silas said one night, the words coming slow and careful. "Never seemed worth the risk. People leave, or they die, or they decide you're not worth the trouble. Easier to keep moving, keep your distance." "But," Kara prompted. "But you make me want to stay. Even when the leg heals and the pass clears, I don't want to leave. I want to be here, with you." Kara was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then she said, "If they close the refuge, there's no here to stay in. Then we'll find another here, together." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright in the firelight. "You mean that?" "Every word." Kara reached out, took his hand, and held it like it was the only solid thing in a world that was shifting under her feet. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Silas Norvak. You pulled me out of a snowbank. That's worth at least a few months of devotion." She laughed, and it was a real laugh this time, warm and unguarded. "Only a few months. We'll renegotiate after the first year." They sat together until the fire burned down to embers, hands clasped, the refuge quiet around them. Outside, the wind howled through the pass. But inside, for the first time in 9 years, Kara Voss was not alone. The bell tolled on a clear, cold morning 6 weeks after Garrett's visit. Silas was outside, testing his weight on the healing leg when he heard it 3 sharp peals, urgent and desperate. Kara came out of the refuge at a run, the dogs at her heels. Someone stranded on the summit road. She was already pulling on her heavy coat, checking the dogs' harnesses. Could be a solo traveler, could be a group. Either way, they're in trouble or they wouldn't be ringing, "I'm coming with you." "Silas, your leg is healed enough to walk. I'm coming." Kara looked at him, started to argue, then nodded. "Fine. But if you fall and break it again, I'm leaving you where you drop." "Fair enough." They set out, Kara breaking trail with the dogs ranging ahead to test the snow. The summit road was a brutal climb, steep and exposed, and the drifts were deep enough in places that Silas sank to his waist. His leg ached, a deep grinding pain that radiated up into his hip, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. They found the travelers a quarter-mile below the summit, a wedding party, 12 people in total, caught in a slide that had swept them off the road and into a jumble of broken rock and ice. 3 of them were trapped under the snow, the rest huddled together, frost-bitten and shaking. "How long have they been buried?" Kara demanded, already directing the dogs to start digging. 10 minutes, maybe 15, one of the men stammered. "We were crossing when the whole slope just went. 15 minutes. Long enough for the cold to kill if they were buried deep." Kara and the dogs worked with ferocious speed, digging through the compacted snow while Silas helped the survivors move to safer ground. One by one, they pulled the buried travelers out, a woman in her 20s, unconscious but breathing, a man with a broken arm, a boy no more than 16, blue-lipped and unresponsive. Kara started compressions on the boy, her hands sure and steady, while Silas wrapped the woman in his coat and tried to get her awake. The dogs, trained for this, pressed close to the survivors, sharing their body heat. "Come on," Kara muttered, counting compressions. "Come on, breathe." The boy gasped, coughed, and sucked in a ragged breath. Kara sat back on her heels, breathing hard, then turned to check on the others. "We need to get them to the refuge. Now. If we stay out here, they'll freeze." It took 3 hours to get everyone down the mountain. Kara and Silas carried the ones who could not walk, the dogs hauling supplies on improvised sleds. the able-bodied survivors stumbling along behind. By the time they reached the refuge, Silas's leg was screaming and Kara's face was gray with exhaustion, but they got everyone inside and alive. The refuge had never been so full. 12 people packed into a space meant for maybe 4, the fire roaring, wet clothes steaming as they dried. Kara moved among them like a field surgeon, checking injuries, dispensing tea laced with herbs to stave off shock, setting the broken arm with strips of wood and bandages. Silas kept the fire fed and the water boiling, made endless pots of stew, found blankets and dry clothes for everyone who needed them. The wedding party stayed for 3 days while the injured recovered enough to travel. In that time, Silas learned that they were farmers and tradesmen from the valley towns, traveling to the bride's family home for the ceremony. They had chosen the pass because it was faster, ignored the warnings because the weather had looked clear, and paid for it when the snowpack shifted under their weight. "We'd be dead if you hadn't come," the bride said on the second night, her voice still shaky. "All of us. Dead and buried, and no one would have known what happened until spring." "That's the job," Kara said, echoing the words she had said to Silas months ago. But this time, when she said it, Silas saw the way her hands trembled as she poured tea, the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the door as if expecting another disaster. This was what she had been doing for 9 years, pulling people out of the snow, patching them up, sending them on their way, and it was breaking her down one rescue at a time. That night, after the wedding party had fallen asleep and the refuge was quiet, Silas found Kara sitting outside on the step, staring up at the stars. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "Tired." She leaned against him and he put his arm around her, feeling the tension in her frame. 3 people buried and we got all 3 out alive. That's a good day. But I keep thinking about what Garrett said, 43% failure rate, like the ones who die are my fault. They are not. I know, but it doesn't feel that way." She was quiet for a moment. "What if he's right, Silas? What if this place is too expensive, too dangerous, and I'm just too stubborn to see it?" "Then you're stubborn for the right reasons. That boy would be dead if you hadn't been here. So would the woman, probably the man with the broken arm. That's 3 lives, Kara. 3 people who get to go home because you didn't give up." He tightened his arm around her. "Don't let Garrett or the commission or anyone else make you doubt that." Kara turned her face into his shoulder and he felt her breath hitch. "I'm glad you're here. So am I." They sat like that until the cold drove them inside, and when they lay down to sleep, Kara reached across the space between their blankets and took his hand. The wedding party left on the 4th day, grateful and shaken, with promises to write letters to the territorial council on Kara's behalf. Silas watched them go, then turned to Kara. "That's 11 people who lived because of you, in 3 days. If that's not proof the refuge needs to stay open, I don't know what is. Maybe." Kara's voice was cautious, but there was hope in it now, fragile and growing. "Maybe it'll be enough." 2 weeks later, Marcus came back up the pass with the next supply run, and this time he was alone. He handed Kara a packet of letters, his expression carefully neutral. "These came for you. Territorial Council, Regional Warden, Postal Service Headquarters. Thought you'd want them right away." Kara took the letters with shaking hands, opened the first one and read it in silence. Then the second, then the third. When she finished, she looked up at Silas, her eyes wide. "The commission's under review." The regional warden opened an investigation into Garrett's report. Turns out he falsified the expenditure records to make the refuge look more expensive than it is. The council suspended the decommissioning order pending a full audit. She read from one of the letters. "In light of recent events and the testimony of multiple parties, The Territorial Council has determined that the Whistler's Pass Refuge provides a critical service and should remain in operation. Silas felt something loosen in his chest. You did it. We did it. Kara set the letters on the table, then crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. We actually did it. Marcus cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Council wants to expand the refuge, add a second building for supplies and overflow, fund a proper training program for the dogs. They're also offering a joint keeper arrangement if you're willing to take on a partner. He glanced at Silas. Seems like you've already got one if he's interested. Silas looked at Kara, saw the question in her eyes, and smiled. I'm interested. Good. Marcus handed Kara a second packet. Then you'll want this. It's the contract for the expanded charter. Pays better, too enough to hire seasonal help if you need it. Kara took the contract, read it, then read it again to make sure she had not misunderstood. When she looked up, there were tears on her cheeks. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me. Thank everyone who wrote letters. There were dozens of them, people you pulled out over the years, traders who used the pass, even a few council members who remembered when their own kin got caught in a storm up here. He tipped his hat to them both. You've got friends, Kara, more than you know. He left them with the supplies and the contract, and Kara stood in the middle of the refuge, holding the papers like they might dissolve if she looked away. I can't believe it, she said. I really can't believe it. Believe it. Silas took her hand, pulled her close. You earned this. Every bit of it. Kara kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of the kind of hope she had not let herself feel in years. And Silas kissed her back, holding her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, because she was. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting in patches to reveal the green underneath. Kara and Silas spent the season preparing for the expansion, clearing ground for the new building, training a litter of pups for the wardens, organizing the records and supplies. The work was hard, but it was good work, and they did it together. In early summer, a letter arrived from the wedding party. They had postponed their ceremony until they could return to the pass, and they wanted to hold it at the refuge as a thank you to the woman who had saved their lives. They want us to be there, Kara said, reading the letter. All of us. They're calling it the Miracle Wedding of Whistler's Pass, and they want to make it a celebration. Are you going to do it? I think so. It's not every day someone asks an orc to attend their wedding. The wedding party arrived in midsummer, when the pass was clear, and the wildflowers were blooming in the meadows below the refuge. They brought food, music, and enough people to fill the refuge and spill out onto the grass. The bride wore a dress of cream-colored wool, the groom a new coat, and when they stood together to speak their vows, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. Afterward, when the dancing had started and the food was being passed around, the bride pulled Kara aside. We wanted to thank you, she said. For everything. We'd be dead if not for you, and we wanted to do something to show our gratitude. So we talked to the council, and they agreed this refuge is going to be an official post station now, with your name on the charter. The Silas Norvak station. Kara stared at her. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep saving lives. And know that you've got people down in the valley who think you're a hero, not a monster. Kara's throat was too tight to answer, so she just nodded. The bride smiled, squeezed her hand, then went back to the dancing. Silas found Kara a few minutes later standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the celebration with an expression he could not quite read. You all right? He asked. Better than all right. She turned to him, her eyes bright. Silas, I've spent my whole life being called a monster, and now I've got a post station with my name on it and a whole valley full of people who think I'm a hero. I don't know how to process that. Then don't process it. Just let yourself feel it. She smiled, took his hand. There's one more thing I want to do today. What's that? Kara pulled him to the center of the crowd, where the bride and groom were standing with the traveling priest who had officiated the ceremony. She spoke to the priest quietly, and Silas saw the man's eyebrows rise, then a slow smile spread across his face. Silas Norvak, Kara said, turning to face him. I know we've only known each other for 6 months. I know this is fast and probably crazy and there are 100 reasons we should wait, but I don't want to wait. I want to marry you right here, right now, with all these people as witnesses. Will you have me? Silas felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely yes. The crowd erupted in cheers and the priest stepped forward with a smile. Then let's make it official. The ceremony was short and simple. Kara and Silas stood together, hands clasped, and spoke the vows that bound them to love, to honor, to stand together through whatever came. When the priest pronounced them married, Silas kissed her in front of everyone, and the cheers were loud enough to shake the mountains. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by friends and strangers who had become friends. And when the night finally wound down and the guests began to settle in for sleep, Kara and Silas slipped away to the refuge. I can't believe we just did that, Kara said, laughing as she closed the door behind them, having second thoughts, not even a little. She pulled him close, kissed him slow and deep. I love you, Silas Norvak. I don't think I've ever said that out loud before, but it's true. I love you. I love you too, Kara Voss. He smiled, rested his forehead against hers. Or should I say Kara Norvak now? Either, both. I don't care as long as I'm yours. They stood together in the quiet refuge, the fire burning low, the dogs snoring in their pile of blankets, and for the first time in her life, Kara felt like she had found the place she was meant to be, not because of the refuge or the post station or the work. Because of the man who looked at her and saw beauty instead of a monster. Because of the life they were building together, one rescue, one day, one moment of stubborn, relentless hope at a time. And that, Kara thought as she led Silas to their bed, was more than enough. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Kara and Silas ran the post station together, pulling travelers out of storms, training dogs, hosting the occasional wedding or celebration for people who wanted to mark important moments in the place that had saved their lives. The work was hard and the winters were brutal, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. In their 3rd year, Kara gave birth to a daughter, a small, squalling thing with her mother's green skin and her father's steady gaze. They named her Kara, and she grew up running wild on the mountain with the dogs, learning to read snow and weather the way other children learn to read books. 2 years later, a second daughter arrived, quieter and more thoughtful than her sister. They named her Lena, and she spent her childhood learning the work of the refuge, how to set bones, mix medicines, keep records that would satisfy even the most particular bureaucrat. The station prospered. The dogs became famous throughout the territory, and keepers from other mountain refuges traveled to Whistler's Pass to learn Kara's training methods. The council funded a 3rd building, then a 4th, until the station was a small village unto itself, a place of safety and warmth in the high, cold places where safety was hard to come by. And through it all, Silas and Kara worked side by side, their love deepening with each passing season. They had their fights, both of them were too stubborn and too used to independence to agree on everything, but they always came back to each other, always found their way through the rough patches to the solid ground underneath. On their 10th anniversary, Silas took Kara up to the summit at dawn, when the light was just beginning to touch the peaks. They stood together, looking out over the valley, and he handed her a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a tiny replica of the refuge, painstakingly detailed, with two figures standing in the doorway. Kara and Silas, immortalized in wood. "I made it over the winter," Silas said. "Figured we should have something to remember this place by, even when we're too old to climb the pass anymore." Kara turned the carving over in her hands, her eyes stinging. "It's perfect." "So are you," she laughed, a little watery, and kissed him. "You're still saying that after 10 years. I'll still be saying it in another 10, and 10 after that." He pulled her close, held her against the wind. "You're beautiful to me, Kara. You always have been. You always will be." And standing there on the summit of Whistler's Pass, with the sun rising over the mountains and the man she loved at her side, Kara Voss believed him. Not because she had stopped seeing the scars or the tusks or the green skin that marked her as different, but because she had finally learned to see herself the way Silas saw her, not as a monster, but as a woman who had spent her life saving others, who had built something beautiful out of the hard, cold stones of the world, who was loved fiercely and completely for exactly who she was. And that, in the end, was all she had ever wanted. They stood together until the sun cleared the peaks, then turned and walked back down to the refuge hand in hand, ready for whatever came next, together, always together.